space. So what is positive and negative space? Simply put, positive space is best described as the area in a work of art that's the subject, or the area of interest. So here, it's this ram, you can see. And the empty space around the ram, here, 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 is considered the negative space. Simply put, positive shapes occupy positive space. The area around positive shapes, the background, is the negative space. Negative space is the area around the subject or the areas of interest, but sometimes ambiguity confuses what the subject actually is. So let's take a look at the image on the right. And what you want to ask yourself is, when you first looked at this image, was it the white vase that you saw or the two faces? Now, if you're seeing the white vase, then you were seeing the white area as the subject matter and therefore the positive space. If you were seeing the two people looking nose to nose, mouth to mouth, chin to chin, then you're seeing the black area as the positive subject matter, the positive space. The real thing to keep in mind, though, is that both spaces are defined by each other. You can't really do one without doing the other. Positive and negative space play a really important role in determining overall composition in a work of art, both in three-dimensional and also in two-dimensional art. Many artists and graphic designers, novelists, use the idea of positive and negative space to create areas of interest. In this Escher image, the fish here is positive, but as it moves up in the ranks becomes the negative space around the bird, which is the positive. And as the bird moves down in space, you'll notice the bird becomes the negative space. Lots of graphic artists or logo designers and illustrators often use the negative space to include more information. Sometimes they like to tell a story. I mean, look at this image here. You definitely feel that there's a dead person dripping blood from a gun. And we don't have to have the whole gun there to actually understand that. The negative space is also telling us that story. So a lot of artists use this in a way to punch up information in simple images. It's a good way to do t-shirt designs as well. One of my favorites of all times is this image of the criminal underworld with Batman and the Penguin. Penguin is the negative space and the positive space at the same time that Batman is. If you look at this beautiful illustration over here, you'll notice that this winding river actually becomes the sky as it goes back in space. If you understand positive and negative space, you can apply that knowledge to more successful compositions. And it's always important to kind of think about the negative space at the same time you're thinking about the positive space, because they're connected visually. Artists like filmmakers and photographers utilize a lot of negative space when working with things like silhouettes. In this photograph, the photographer directs your eye to the most important information by telling the story of what's happening. You'll notice this giant hedge and dark space leads your eye to this center focus point where you're seeing the kiss. Artists like Kara Walker utilize negative space in working in silhouette and also in puppetry. And lots of sculptors have to think about the negative space and the interplay between the empty space, the negative space, and the actual positive space in the work of art. So without these spaces that are here, this probably wouldn't nearly be as interesting a composition. And the same as this one. It's one of my favorite sculptures. It's beautiful. My eye flows all over these moving and turning spaces. You just can't not follow them. They're very beautiful. And yet, if we imagine this as a solid mass with no negative space whatsoever, just all black solid, it wouldn't nearly be as intriguing or have as much movement and motion and direction. In drawing, it's incredibly important to observe the negative space. This is why we're going to be doing an actual exercise in just drawing negative space only. So let's discuss how to draw the negative space and why you need to practice it as an artist. When you draw the negative shape, you're actually drawing the positive information at the same time. You can't really have one without the other. When you adjust one, you're actually adjusting the other at the same time. So when we look at some of these harder to draw things, like this pipe that's foreshortened to us, or this body of this mannequin that's foreshortened to us, or even this sphere, this hoop that's kind of circular and foreshortened towards us. If we look at it just as the empty space shapes, see this empty space shape and this empty space shape and this empty space shape? Do you see how it draws the negative space, or excuse me, the negative space is drawing the positive space for us? And that foreshortening is happening without us even having to draw it. It's just one shape stacked upon another is allowing us that foreshortening. You always want to think about that with your foreshortening, especially in figure drawing. And if you ever take the figure drawing class, you'll definitely want to pay attention to your negative space, because it'll help you to put things going back in space more accurately and more effectively. Remember, these are human beings and they don't have time. You know, they can't sit there forever for you to draw like a still life object. So you don't have time. Considering your negative space becomes super important. The goal of negative space shape drawing is to allow the negative space to build the positive image. So here we can look at the hand below, and here's the hand. Look at the empty space here, which now is flattened in green. And you can see that it builds the shape of the positive as you build those negative spaces. Now notice that in the white area here, you're not seeing where the finger crosses over or touches the other finger or the knuckle here, because that would be drawing positively. We're really just drawing the shape of this negative area, the shape of this negative area in relationship to each other, leaving the positive space between. So there's some things you really have to pay attention to when you draw in positive and negative space. You have to be sure to align your negative shapes to ensure that the positive space is built correctly and aligned correctly. So let's look at where this artist did not do that. Here you can see this edge, this line, oops, it bent in, and then here it kind of swoops in again and comes down. Do you see how those are not aligned? But if we look at the actual image that this person is drawing, you can see that this is aligned. And it's important that you do that alignment as you work on things. You can see they've even missed like this whole secondary section here where this is. You don't even see that little triangle here. Notice this negative space is not aligned with this negative space. So you do have to align your edges as you're working through your composition. Look at this one. Here it's almost aligned there, but then it moves over here. You have to try to align these shapes. Now you're going to be expected to set up your own still life for this module to do one of your major projects. So you're going to want to prove in your still life that you understand how to create a still life that has negative space. So you want to try to look for objects and things that can easily create readable negative space shapes. Be sure to include any of your instructor's requirements. I always recommend also using a solid colored cloth for a backdrop, so it's easier to see the negative space shapes. However, you need to know that if your subject matter is black, like these cages are, and you use a black solid colored cloth, it will not help you to see because the values of the cloth is too close to the relationship of the cages. So think about that too when you select the cloth for your backdrop. Some of the things that can make really great negative space really easily is things like string, thick string and yarn and cords and hoses. Things like ladders and chairs and stools. And one of the things that's the easiest to find that actually does make great negative space shapes is plants. You can overlap them by taking this plant and kind of overlapping it with this plant. You could create negative space between the two. All right, I hope that helps you to kind of think about negative space in a different way, and I hope you understand how to kind of look for objects that will help you to set up negative space in your negative space drawing. Good luck!